Hey everyone, welcome live viewers. Good to see you. This is the green room video portion, as always, of my podcast recording. The podcast goes live tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So I always do a video recording the day before as a live session. So glad you have joined me today. So as a reminder for those who are viewing via video, if it's live, you can post a comment below. I will see those pop up, hopefully. And I will hopefully answer those if I do see them pop up throughout the broadcast. So you'll be able to see those as well and get the reply as I go. So as always, we're going to kick this off by the intro music for the podcast, and we'll get going. Stand by. Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. Glad you are with us. So September kicks off my themed month of liquidity and emergency fund savings. As you may know by now, I tend to go with a theme for each month of the year. In my practice, when I work with my clients, I kind of work in a financial planning context of different themes throughout the year. So different months have different themes attached to them depending on different events going throughout the year from a financial standpoint or just good timing for certain things. So last month was insurance, and this month is liquidity and short-term savings, which is emergency fund as well. So we're going to talk emergency fund today. First of all, why do I make September the emergency fund and short-term savings month? Well, because the holidays are coming up. Honestly, the holidays are notorious for just devouring your cash flow and your savings. It just happens to most, if not all of us. So it's a great time to be thinking about proactively planning for that to occur so that you can proactively prevent it. If you just kind of wander into the holiday season, cash tends to just fly out the window, and you kind of wonder why your savings is depleted or why you're in debt or why credit card bills are racking up. So by contrast, if we can go into the holiday season proactively realizing that this is going to happen and actively working to build up our savings in advance and put a plan in place and really think about budgeting properly, we can really have a lot more success and end the year in a positive note financially, as opposed to being in debt and kind of being in a bad spot. So that's why I make September kind of my short-term savings, liquidity, emergency fund themed month for my clients and for my media, such as the podcast, live, and email. So with that, let's talk emergency fund savings today. So a few podcast episodes ago, I did talk about the emergency fund. I think I titled it Emergency Fund 101, just kind of a walkthrough of what it is. But today I'm going to go a little deeper, and I'm going to talk about emergency fund life hacks. So what is a life hack? First off, it's just a kind of a way of tricking yourself or creating a system or a process to meet a goal. So a life hack is just kind of a way to make it more successful, or make your goal more successful or more likely to be reached. Little tips and tricks to kind of get you there. So we are going to talk emergency fund life hacks today. So just kind of a quick review on emergency fund. What is an emergency fund? We'll take a couple minutes and just kind of set the stage and recap on that. So emergency fund, it's really insurance against unforeseen events. It's a buffer between you and the storms financially of life. And it's meant to give you a nice cash cushion in the event that something comes up that is unforeseen, unexpected, something that is going to require a lot of money. Some examples might be a car breaking down and have big expensive repairs, or a medical emergency where your deductible is going to be or you're going to run into that deductible, have a big medical bill. Maybe appliances go out, or damage to your house, or something that comes up that is unexpected, unforeseen, and expensive. We want to have cash laying around for those types of things. We want to have, the typical wisdom has been up to now 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund. I go with minimum 6 months now. First of all, the global pandemic has really taught us the value of a healthy emergency fund. So I'm a big fan of making sure it is 6 months. I would say even 6 to 9 months, if not even more. So there's nothing wrong with having a good, healthy emergency fund, especially if it's a single income household or your job situation is less stable. Those are all good reasons to make that emergency fund even larger than the typical, 3 to 6 months of expenses guideline that we've heard before. So again, I say 6 months. Make it a 6-month minimum goal of expenses in the bank for your emergency fund. It also helps you avoid debt. Debt is a big drag on your cash flow and your life in general. And if you don't have a good, healthy emergency fund, you're more likely to go into debt using credit cards or other forms of debt. And that gets you further behind and makes it more difficult to kind of catch up and get ahead financially. So emergency fund is there to help you avoid debt, help you handle the storms of life that come your way financially, that come to all of us, big unexpected events. It's an insurance policy against those things. So that's your emergency fund. So what are some life hacks to getting it done? So it's very difficult for a lot of us to build up an emergency fund because, first of all, 6 months of expenses is a lot of money. Having that sitting in the bank is a pretty big goal. That could be a big pile of cash. It could be more than we've ever saved before. And so we want to have a good path to success so we can make that a little bit easier. And it's really important. It's one of the most important parts of a financial plan. In most financial planning methodologies, you're going to always start with the emergency fund being number one. Before investing, before even paying off debt, before anything else, you want to make sure that number one is that emergency fund. It is front and center in your priority list. Get the emergency fund at least funded partially before you move on to any other priorities. So it's extremely important. You know, when I took my test for my license, one of the recurring questions over and over was, what's the first thing this client should do? And it's always build an emergency fund first. So it's very universal that we want to build that up first. So we know why it's important. We know we should have one. How do we get there? So building up an emergency fund takes time. Once you get there, it feels awesome. It's a really great feeling to have that security. But getting there can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes because it can be a slow process. And of course, saving cash flow out of your budget can be difficult to find ways to make that fit. So here's a few life hacks I'm going to go through that have helped me in the past that may help you as you build up and maintain an emergency fund. So first, I advise using a separate bank and typically a separate online bank. I occasionally get pushback from this because it seems like it would be more complicated, but I promise you it works. I've been using this system for a long time, and my clients that kind of take the leap of faith and humor me and do this, they find that it works really well also. So I have a whole blog post on this as well, but going more in depth about the structure overall. But in general, I have one bank that's my operating account. So in our household, we have an operating account bank that's a local brick and mortar bank, just an everyday checking account, money coming in, money going out, everyday stuff. So there are other bank accounts that I recommend setting up, and one of those is your short-term savings. So when I say short-term savings, I mean emergency fund plus extra stuff on top of the emergency fund, which we'll talk about in a minute. So when I say short-term savings, just know that means your emergency fund. And I really think that needs to be an online bank that's a separate bank from your everyday checking account. Here's why. So if your emergency fund or your short-term savings is in the same bank as you use for your everyday checking, it's right there in the same view when you log into online banking, and you can transfer money between them within seconds. It's an instant transfer. So if you need to pull cash from your savings account, you just do a quick transfer, and within minutes, it's in your checking account and you can use it. That makes it really easy to use. The upside is it's really easy to use. The downside is it's really easy to use because you want your emergency fund to be kind of in a special category. You want it to be set aside in a special context that is not for everyday stuff. And as much as we all like to think that we are super disciplined and that we're going to make good choices all the time, human nature kicks in and we don't always make the right decision or good decisions or healthy decisions financially. I myself included. So if things are too easy to grab money from, I may be likely to grab money from my emergency fund when it's not appropriate. So for me, I use an online bank that is a totally separate bank because I want that buffer. I want to have it take 2 or 3 days to transfer that money. I want it to be kind of out of sight, out of mind. I want it to be someplace I can't walk into. I personally use Capital One 360 for my emergency fund. I have a checking and a savings account kind of combined. So if I need to, I can pull money into checking to use it for short-term emergencies or emergencies that pop up without warning. But it's not my everyday account that I'm using for stuff. Money's not going into it directly from income. I'm not paying bills out of it. It's a very separate kind of quiet account. It's not being used very much on purpose. So that's a really good life hack, I think, that's worked for me and a lot of other people, is make sure that your emergency fund is in a separate bank, preferably online. So you can make a little bit of interest as well. Online banks pay a little more of interest. So that'll give you a little bit of a boost as well. But in general, the idea behind having it in a separate online bank is it's out of sight, out of mind. It's separate. You can't do an instant transfer very quickly. And you've got that buffer. That really helps a lot of people mentally label that emergency fund appropriately for what it's supposed to be used for. Next, pay yourself first. You may have heard this. A lot of people say, pay yourself first when they're talking about investing and building wealth, et cetera. And I think this really applies to your emergency fund. So if you're in the process of building your emergency fund, make your emergency fund contribution the first thing you do every month, or the first thing you do with every paycheck, or the first thing you do with every bit of income that comes in before you pay bills, before you divvy it out for other stuff. Pay yourself first by putting a portion of that into your emergency fund. Budget a certain amount that every month or every paycheck or every bit of income that comes in, you're going to take a good chunk of that and you're going to put that into your emergency fund first before you do anything else. It's really easy for the emergency fund savings or any kind of savings goal to fall to the back burner with leftover money that is not really there after you use it for other stuff. But if you use it for savings first, you're going to find a way to make the rest work. So pay yourself first, invest in your emergency fund first. Next, also hyper important, automate recurring savings. I'm a huge fan of automation. Again, this is human nature. A lot of this stuff is just behavioral life hacking. So if you are relying on yourself to manually make a transfer every month to fund your emergency fund, yeah, it might work, but some months you may say, well, I'm going to wait till later in the month to do that because I want to buy something else. And then it's the 30th of the month and you're like, well, I didn't do it, so I'll just skip this month. And then suddenly you've pushed pause on funding your emergency fund and building it up. So if you automate things with most online banks or any bank in general, you can do an automatic transfer. So that on the first of each month or whatever period you want, it just automatically transfers money from your checking account into your savings account. Just like clockwork, without any intervention, it just happens. So when you automate that transfer, you are able to get really hands off about it and really just let it happen in the background without your intervention, which makes it a habit. It makes it something that is creating inertia. It's financial inertia. The momentum going forward will carry that savings plan, and you have to actively prevent it if you want to make a change, as opposed to actively doing it to actually do it. So automated recurring savings, big help when it comes to behavioral life hack finance stuff. Next, budget your money. This is a bigger conversation. I can't go into it overall, but I've got I think a few podcasts ago, I talked about using, you need a budget for budgeting your money. So go check that out. But in general, budget your money. Have a system, whether it's Mint or YNAB or Every Dollar or whatever you want to use. Use something to budget your money. That way you can put a line item in your budget that says emergency fund or short-term savings is what I call it, because I kind of combine it into two things. So, short-term savings or emergency fund, put that in your budget as a line item, put it at the top, put it very prominently at the top so that it's one of the first things that is funded and the first things that is accounted for. There's a whole big conversation to have around budgeting that is ongoing, which we're not going to have today, but just be aware that running your household on a budget is hyper important and is extremely helpful in funding your emergency fund because you can budget for it and plan for it. Next, give yourself milestones and rewards as you build it up. So again, this is a long kind of process sometimes. So if you're starting from zero and you want to get your emergency fund up to 6 months of expenses, that can take months. It can take a while. It can take even a year or more, or more than a year. And so it's really important to keep yourself motivated. And so I really like the idea of giving yourself milestones. So for example, in the first, see a pop up here. Stephanie says, I love budgeting. Thanks, Stephanie. I love people that love budgeting. I'm a nerd about this. So for those who are listening on audio after the fact, I do have comments coming in on the Facebook Live version here. So thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate that. Also a huge fan of budgeting. I get real excited about it because I'm taking control of my money. It's intentional. So I'll resist going down the rabbit hole of talking budgeting here. So give yourself milestones. So maybe you divide up into 6 chunks, or maybe 3 chunks, or whatever milestones you want to create. You want to set up a system of rewards and milestones so that you can get that motivation, get excited about it. So you want to be able to say, okay, I'm reaching milestone number 1. So maybe, we go out to dinner. Maybe I buy myself an ice cream cone. Maybe I don't know, do something that is a reward. Maybe you buy something modest that is something you've always wanted. Go clothes shopping or whatever it might be. Set up a reward system for yourself so that you motivate yourself. So you know that along the way, as you build up your emergency fund, you're rewarding yourself with incentives along the way. So when you get to that first milestone, you have a list on your refrigerator, for example, that says, hey, the first milestone means I get to do this. Next milestone, this. Maybe the final milestone is something even bigger. Maybe it's a weekend vacation somewhere, or buy yourself a grill, or whatever might be. I don't know, something that's useful for you to motivate you. So milestones are really helpful. Next, stash your windfalls. What does this mean? So if you get in the habit of thinking of your extra money that comes along as kind of earmarked to accelerate your goal in advance, then it's going to be really helpful to get there faster. So a windfall is, for example, if you have a chunk of money coming in that you didn't expect. So maybe it's a gift from a relative around holiday season, or maybe you sold something at a garage sale that you didn't expect to sell and you've got an extra $100 laying around. Maybe, I don't know, whatever happens, you had an odd job that came up or a consulting gig and you got an extra $500 or $1,000 that came in that was unexpected. When you get a windfall like that, that is out of the ordinary, when it's something outside the norm of your cash flow or your income, immediately plan to prioritize half, most, even all of it toward your emergency fund. Just decide in advance that any extra money is not part of your budget that comes in. It's going to be part of your emergency fund. You're going to fund that faster. Next, consider a two-tier emergency fund. This is a little bit tricky and somewhat interesting. So a lot of people are, I should say, they lack motivation to build an emergency fund because they want to get to investing quicker. Investing sounds like more fun because they're making a return on their money. They're investing in the stock market. They're watching their Roth IRA grow, and that's more interesting to them. And they don't like the idea of putting an emergency fund in a bank account earning very little money, and they'd rather be investing that money. So if it's helpful, and I want to be very careful about this because there's a whole slew of contingencies to think about and plan for this, but it can be helpful to make one of your milestones that half of your emergency fund is going to be in a regular cash account, and maybe the other half or a portion of it will be in a very conservative investment account that has a little bit of risk attached to it. It may lose a little bit of value, but it's pretty conservative. It's not likely to have a lot of volatility like the stock market would in general, like an all stock fund. So it is possible, and it is appropriate in some cases and in some contexts, to do a little bit of investing with your emergency fund if there's a portion of it that your financial plan dictates is acceptable. So again, I don't want to make this blanket advice because it's not right for everybody, but one hypothetical is, let's say you're shooting for 6 months of expenses. The first 3 months could be in a savings account. The next 3 months could be in a very conservative investment account where you're watching it make a little bit of a return, a little bit more return than it would in a savings account. It's a little bit invested in the market with a nice broad diversified spectrum where if you did have to draw on your emergency fund, you're going to pull on the cash first, and that gives the other half of the emergency fund time to find a higher point in the market before you liquidate it and use it if you have to keep using it. So that is one example of a way you can make your emergency fund a little more interesting and even earn a little bit more money on it if it's appropriate for your context. Again, not one size fits all. There's a lot of factors to consider in that, but it's something to consider. All right, so what else do you do once you have your emergency fund fully funded? One of the best things you can do with your emergency fund is to continue saving even after it's fully funded. So let's say you're shooting for 6 months of expenses. Let's say you get to that point. You've got 6 months of expenses in the bank. You're good to go. You feel awesome. You've checked that box. Yay on you. Now, what do? Do you just let it sit there and stop saving and stop contributing? No. You keep adding money to it. And here's why. When you have your emergency fund built up, then it's time to add more on top of that. That is your sinking fund for things like buying a new car, buying big appliances, bigger stuff that is planned, not emergencies, but they are planned expenses that you want to have money for. If you don't do this, you're going to be in danger of going into debt or cannibalizing your emergency fund unintentionally, or I should say intentionally, because it is intentional, but without planning ahead for it, or just buying things on payments and, like I said, going into debt. So you want to start building up more cash on top of that. So if your emergency fund is 6 months, then shoot for an extra 5,000 on top of that, an extra 10,000, extra 15,000, and there's not really any danger of oversaving because I have yet to meet anyone who ever oversaves. It just doesn't happen. So if you're worried about oversaving, it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. There's always something that you will be able to use the money for. No one's ever going to be mad about having too much money in your savings. Now, the caveat is don't save at the expense of not investing. So if you need to save for retirement and your investing schedule dictates a certain investing schedule, do that, and then come back and continue building up your emergency fund with extra stuff on top of it, extra cash on top of that. So when you when you save more on top of your emergency fund, then it truly becomes a short-term savings account. It's no longer just an emergency fund, it's short-term savings, where part of it is earmarked for emergency fund, and the other part, on top of that, it's earmarked for, again, buying a new car, buying a big appliance, doing home improvement, stuff that most people would get a HELOC for or go in debt for. You won't have to do that because you're proactively saving month over month, like clockwork, in a habitual schedule. When it becomes a habit, you will always have this culture in your household of saving and building up cash for investments in your life. So keep saving even once it's funded. All right, finally, this is also kind of a structural banking structure thing I've talked about before, which is keep it separate from other big expenditure type stuff, like your tax savings account if you're an entrepreneur. So if you're a business owner, make sure you have a tax account set up that is separate from your short-term savings, because you want to have a whole separate schedule of investing quarterly estimated tax cash into that account. You don't want that coming out of your emergency fund. You don't want that to eat up your emergency fund. It's a whole separate thing. Also, travel and vacation, maybe even gifting, that kind of stuff tends to eat up cash. It tends to destroy, and these big cash hungry events like holidays and like vacations, they destroy your cash flow in your emergency fund. So make sure you have a separate account set up for travel and vacation. Again, maybe for holidays and gifting. Set up those accounts so that you have intentional purpose behind saving that money for those things, so that those things don't become cash hungry, destructive events that pull on your emergency fund and cause you to deplete it unnecessarily and inappropriately. So again, have those separate accounts set up and intentionally plan for those things so that they're decoys. I call them decoys because they are great decoys for cash flow. So if you don't have those decoys set up, those cash hungry events like taxes and like travel and vacations are going to come in and they're going to dip into your emergency fund and they're going to grab cash. But if you set up these decoys of other accounts that redirect money into those accounts for the things they're intended for, you're going to have a much easier time when it comes to preserving your emergency fund and using it for what it's intended for, which is emergencies. It's that insurance policy. So those are my life hacks for funding, building, and maintaining your emergency fund. They're pretty behavioral in nature, but I agree with a lot of the financial experts like Dave Ramsey who say that personal finance is mostly behavior. It's not about math. The math is important. The math is critical to the structural foundation of your financial planning, of course, but the behavior is often, and usually, in my opinion, more important. Behavior is what leads to wealth. Behavior is what leads to success. It's the behavior that allows you to reach your goals when it comes to money. And again, build wealth through behavior. So these life hacks have helped me a lot. And I believe they've helped others. And I certainly hope they help you to build and maintain and have a good, healthy emergency fund that'll help you weather those storms. Because as we've seen this year, especially, these financial storms are very real. They come to all of us. They come to every household at some point. So we want to be able to weather that storm, to be able to have a good emergency fund, have a strong foundation under us so we can withstand those financial storms. So give me a shout if you have any questions or if I can help with anything. As always, you can reach me on my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. And again, I'm an independent financial advisor. I own my own firm and I can work independently all over the country with anybody in all 50 states virtually. So if you'd like some help or just want to book a complimentary money session to chat about your questions, go to elevationfinancial.com and book a meeting online, a 45-minute money session. It is free, complimentary, and I'd be happy to chat. So with that, thanks everyone for joining us today. Appreciate you being here today. Have a great day. See you next time. All right. Big thanks to all my live viewers. The podcast recording is officially off. So we're in the post-recording green room. So I want to thank Stephanie for popping in with a comment. Again, Stephanie, I love that you love budgeting. I really appreciate that. I am also a huge budgeting fan. So Stephanie, if you're still with us, feel free to comment back. Let me know what you use for budgeting. I use YNAB personally for budgeting. I've used Mint. I've used EveryDollar. None of those work as well, in my opinion, as YNAB, which is short for You Need a Budget. So if you're using YNAB, let me know. Let me know what you are using, Stephanie. And again, for everyone who joined me today, appreciate you being here. We do go live. When I say we, I mean me or me and a guest. So me/we. We do go live every Tuesday at 1:30 Eastern. So if you'd like to check in every Tuesday at 1:30 Eastern, 1:30 p.m., that's when I go live with this recording session. And that's when I can take questions via comments. And it's kind of nice to see the live interaction as well. So thanks to everyone who joined today. You have a great day as well. See you next time. Oh, Stephanie, thank you. I'm still on the air. So Stephanie did say I'm currently using Excel, but budget out weekly and I budget 3 years at a time. Wow, 3 years at a time. That's amazing. Fantastic, Stephanie. I love it. I'm going to post your comment there on the video so everybody can see it. That's pretty amazing. So I'd love to kind of hear, maybe not now, but those who use spreadsheets, I'm always curious about that because to me, spreadsheets are, they're useful, but they're a little trickier because it's hard to stay in sync. I'm really a big fan of staying in sync with your bank. And Stephanie, you did pop in with a comment, follow-up saying, I'm interested in learning about the software options, but it would save some time. So yeah, I agree. The software options do save time, in my opinion, because they sync up with your bank. So if you're using a spreadsheet, that's pretty good. But in my opinion, you're going to save a ton of time by using something like YNAB. Again, YNAB is my favorite, so I'm just going to say YNAB. YNAB is short for You Need a Budget. So if you Google YNAB, you will find it. It is not free. It's $84 a year, I believe, but it's so worth it. It's amazing. So I think, I forget which podcast episode it is, but a few podcast episodes ago, I did talk about how to budget with YNAB, and I go through kind of how to set it up and the methodology behind it. So you might check that out on the podcast as well. So hit me up, give me a shout if you want to talk budgeting or anything else. So thanks, Stephanie. Glad you were here and appreciate your comments, and everyone else that was viewing as well. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast and say have a great day to everyone. See you next time. Thanks.